Hey, what's going on, guys? So today we're talking about the top 4 best decks from over the weekend at the North American Nationals. So I just decided to cover these really quick. I'm sure anybody that covers deck lists, other than their own, will probably be talking about this. But this is just my perspective on this, obviously, as well. And we always do our best we can do to attribute not only the person who made the deck, but also the person who wrote the article, because they had to take time on YGOProDeck.com to actually build this whole article and do the pictures and all that. I'm pretty sure it's Ren because it's always Ren. It was, in fact, the author is, in fact, Ren. But without further ado, let's just jump into it. Starting with 4th place or 3rd place, however you want to feel about it, because I don't think they do. That would be pretty cool if they did do that. But I don't think they do like a 3rd place match and see. I think they just go off tiebreakers. But this was a top 4 finish by Mariness. Like I said, the article was Ren. This is an ad for 5 Guys, maybe. I'm not sure. The creator was Elijah Green. That was the pilot. And without further ado, let's just jump into the deck profile. We have 3 copies of Mariness Blue Tang, 3 copies of Mariness Spring Girl, 3 copies of Mariness Seahorse, 1 copy of Mariness Sleepy Maiden, 2 copies of Pascalis. Pretty standard. I don't obviously know Mariness super duper well. It's definitely something I've been trying to learn about what it does as time goes on. It does still, like, even though it got top 4 in North American Nationals, which is insane, it does still suffer from does a lot to not really get a whole lot in return. I'd be curious to see if, like, because I know we saw Lava Golem on the feature match. I'd be curious to see if we saw Kaiju's come back to just kind of try to counter Mariness. Because they usually do end on maybe 1 or 2 monsters. But still a very consistent deck, and still another one of those decks that's like, oh, I have 1 card of my engine, let's go crazy. That's why we are seeing 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous 3 copies of Effect Failure, 3 copies of Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, and 3 copies of Nibiru. These are 2 hand traps that haven't seen a lot of play in the meta, but probably are now more recently for some form of a meta call. I'm not really quite sure. I know Adventurer, Punk, that deck doesn't love Nibiru. If you can play around it, it does great, but if not, then it really does get hurt by it. All Adventurer decks are kind of like that. They can play around Nibiru, but they also end up in a really bad spot. Whereas you look at Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, what's interesting about Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit is that it always... It's usually as good as it always is, which means, like, it's kind of like Ash in that way. Like, Ash is usually pretty good, or just okay. And Ghost Ogre is kind of like that too. It's not as consistently good as Ash, but there are a lot of decks that either it's a little weird, it makes them a little uncomfortable that you played the Ghost Ogre, or it just completely shuts down their play because you played Ghost Ogre. So Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, really solid card. 1 copy of Mariness Battle Ocean, 2 copies of Mariness Dive, 2 copies of Pot of Desire. It's actually at 2. 1 Called by the Grave, obviously. 3 Signet Mining. 3 copies of Triple Tactics Talent in the main deck, which is pretty spicy, but you don't really ever control 1, how many hand traps your opponent opens going first, nor do you control whether or not you are going first or second. And this is a underrated going second card. I don't think a lot of people view Triple Tactics Talent as a going second card, just kind of like a versatile card, but it really can break boards with its ability to take a monster after your opponent activates a monster effect. And think about that. Like, so, let's say, for example, you're staring down like a Baron, a Blackout, and a Grandmaster. So, you know, you activate, I don't know, Pot of Desires to try to bait the Baron. They negate it with Baron. You activate Triple Tactics Talent to take the Grandmaster, right? And now all of a sudden, just in a great spot, right? Even if you're able to out it without using Triple Tactics Talent, then you can just get rid of a card in your opponent's hand. or maybe you don't have the greatest card. Like, this is actually really solid going second card, but it's also really solid going first card as well. It just depends on the matchup, because there are matchups like Eldritch, Sky Striker, where this does absolutely nothing. 3 copies of Infinite Permanence, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hand traps, all at 3, so we're running a lot of hand traps. Actually, because there's 10, 11, 12. There are 15 Marinest cards in here, and there are 15 hand traps. There are actually 16 Marinest cards, the last card being Marinest Wave. But that's kind of the way you have to build the decks nowadays. You know what I mean? You don't want to go too heavy on the hand traps, right? But at the end of the day, like I said, you can't control if you're going first or second, and hand traps are just so powerful. This is a very powerful card too, the Marinest Wave. Definitely something you need to be aware of if playing the archetype or against it. Now, for the extra deck, we are going to see 1 copy of Marinus Great Bubble Reef, 1 copy of Marinus Aqua Argonaut, 1 copy of Coral Triangle, 2 copies of Coral Anemone, 1 copy of Marbled Rock, 2 copies of Sea Angel, 2 copies of Blue Slug, 1 copy of the Water Charmer, 1 copy of Splash Mage, 1 copy of Stealth Kraken, 1 Bahamut Shark, and of course, 1 Totally Awesome. We might actually see this card get preemptively banned, because not only is it being ran in like the Shark Rank 4 spam deck, it's also being ran in this, and it will also be ran in Spelite, so Totally Awesome. And I will be doing a ban list video later in the week. If I'm wearing the same shirt, don't read too deep into that. Just talking about what cards probably need to come off the ban list, but more likely what cards need to come on the ban list, because we'll just get to that later. But I like the Splash Mage here. You're like, well, I know transcode, access code. A lot of the Marinazzo cards lock you into water monsters, which is unfortunate. However, it's not really super unfortunate, because Splash Mage is going to be one of those great extenders, because it just requires 2 Cybers monsters, and if you haven't noticed, they're all Cybers monsters. It's super duper fantastic. Splash Mage is a great extender in that form. But that's it for the main deck. 40 card main deck, by the way. Pretty unique, actually. We haven't really been seeing, we've seen a lot of 45, 42s, 50s, but 40 right on the dot for Marinus. For the side deck, triple Gozen, obviously, 2 DD Crow, it's really solid. Surprised it's not mained, but it's still amazing side deck card. 3 Droll and Lockbird, 3 Lightning Storm, 1 Harpy's Feather Duster, and of course, the triple Token Collector. So pretty solid side deck. Actually, amazing side deck. If this is your side deck, I have no quarrels. Now, me personally, as we open DD Crow, I would swap out 2 DD Crow for 2 Nibiru's. Meaning put the 2 DD Crows in the main. I just think DD Crow hits more things than Nibiru. Like I mentioned, Sky Striker, Eldritch, which doesn't really get hurt by Triple Attack Talent, also doesn't really get hurt by Nibiru, but it does get hurt a lot by DD Crow. A lot of times, Sword Soul. Sword Soul's not the best deck to play DD Crow against, but it certainly can play around Nibiru pretty well too. So that's something to keep in mind. But both hand traps are absolutely phenomenal. It's not like they're playing Haywade or whatever. The other top 4 deck, this article was, I'm not just going to say Ren. We're going to check first. Okay, so this was also written by Ren. This was piloted by Pascal Manigat, excuse me. There probably are YouTube videos talking about these decks if you guys look up into them and just want to see what the actual pilot thought about their deck. This is just my opinion, obviously, on the actual deck that we're seeing. But let's jump right into it. This will probably be also another 40 card deck. We don't need to see Floanderies go too high. But without further ado, 2 copies of the Penguin, 2 copies of Eaglin, 3 Robina, 1 copy of Toucan. Let me double check to make sure they're not. Okay. Sometimes people get spicy with Steri. So 1 copy of Street, 1 copy of the Floodgate, 3 copies of Samoric Bird of Perfection. So this is something that they've been running, they being Floanderies, as of recently. For those who don't know what it does, while this card face out up on the field, it's also wind attribute, so that's convenient. You can only use the effects once per turn. During the main phase, if you normal a special wing base, you can immediately normal summon another Spork monster. If this card's normal summon, you can send one and add one. Right, and so this is the target for that. So we'll just jump right into this one. All wing base. It's a field spell, so you don't really love it. But it does deck thin, right? Because this deck does still struggle with getting in its own way. Which is why we see 9 draw power cards here at the bottom. Because the deck does kind of get in its own way sometimes. But this deck thins super well. Kind of like a tune table of contents where it can get itself out of the way. So you can roll summon this card, send itself, add this card, and now you just took 2 cards out of your deck that you didn't want to draw otherwise. Right, that's kind of how the card functions. It also has it does other things as well. It doesn't lock you out of the extra deck with giving you the actual normal summon, but I think all the other ones do anyway. But anyway, 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. It is a wind attribute, and it is a very powerful card. 3 copies of Dimension Shifter, which is one of the best reasons to run this deck. 1 copy of Mist Valley Apex Avion. 1 copy of Ryza, the Mega Monarch. And that's actually for the monsters. Not an insane monster lineup. Like I said, they kind of been transitioning to this Flow Andrews players, so it makes sense that this card was at 3 in a top 4 deck. For the spells, 3 copies of the map, 3 copies of Adventurer, 1 copy of the Unexplored Winds, 1 copy of the Symbolic Field spell. This is what it does, by the way, for those who don't know. You can reveal 1 level 5 or higher wing-based monster. This turn, you can normal summon with a little less tribute. If you control a wing-based monster, immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon wing beast. So it is just an extra normal summon, right? Which is insane because it doesn't say on top of your normal summon. It doesn't say anything like that. So it's kind of like the Yugioh or the map. Whereas as soon as you normal summon it, the normal summon that you get, even if you normal summon 5, 10, 15, 20 times, you can normal summon again, right? So the idea is you play map, normal summon, do the normal summon flow things. You play this field spell, do the normal summon flow things. You probably want to end on map because map does have an interaction during your opponent's turn. However, just the extra normal is pretty solid. 3 prosperity, 3 extravagance, 3 duality, not explaining that. And then of course the 1 Dreaming Town, which if you're not ready for it, it's pretty solid. I have no comments about this. This is okay, let me say this. Especially because this deck got top 4 at Nationals. If you're gonna run Floandries and it's not gonna look exactly like this, you're gonna need a very, very solid reason. Maybe 3 Ash instead of 3 Droll, because Droll doesn't hit everything, but Ash kind of does. But Droll's kind of really good this format. Sword Soul gets hurt by it. Not as much. Adventure. Some of the adventure decks get hurt by it. Branded Despia can get hurt by it. Sky Striker, which is a deck we know is very big, that gets destroyed by Droll and Lockbird. So I guess this could be whatever hand trap you feel is necessary. But other than that, like, this is a really, really solid list. Obviously, got top 4 for the extra deck. I like this because a lot of times when you see Flow Andrews decks, because it's like, oh, we're running Prosperity and we're running Extravagance, so I'm just gonna run like the Armoroid Fusion Monster, and I'm gonna run Cyber End Dragon, and I'm gonna run Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, and they run cards that they can literally never summon, right? Every single card in this extra deck can be summoned at some point, right? We're talking 3 copies of Zeus, 3 copies of Downer, 3 copies of Lyricist Assembled Nightingale. Tri Brigade Lyricist got top 16, by the way. Just wanted to throw that out there for the Tri Brigade Lyricist players out there. I added DB Grinder because I know he's super into that deck. He mentioned the Dream Will Never Die, which I appreciate. But 2 copies of Pro Meat Thrush, 2 copies of Tornado Dragon, 2 copies of Nightmare Phoenix. And we're also seeing, too, the reason why it's in multiples is because if we banish, odds are with Pot of Extravagance, we blind banish 6. We're not going to banish all copies of Zeus, all copies of Downard, right? That's why we got to run it in multiples. Even if we banish 2 copies of Downard, 2 copies of Zeus, you know, Nightmare Phoenix and Tornado Dragon, we still have access to the combo where we can special summon this out, attack directly, go into Downard, go into Zeus. Now, obviously, if your opponent, obviously, if you normal summoned any of the flow cards, you're not gonna be able to do that. But it's all about setup. Remember, a map allows you to summon during your opponent's turn. So your opponent normal summons, you do a whole bunch of different forms of disruption. Your opponent's like, okay, I pass without outing these cards. If they leave 2 up there, you can just go. I'm trying to think too, if you normal summon without. Oh, immediately after the effective zones. You can only use each effect and cannot special summon for the rest of the turn. You activate the effects, right? So you can normal summon these cards, not activate their effects, and get to Zeus. And Zeus is a huge out to a lot of problematic scenarios because if you haven't noticed, there is, well, you can just scroll down, I'm not going to count it. There is 17 spells in the extra deck, and there is a very powerful card that we're going to be talking about on the banlist video that counters all of these spells. Literally, I think, no, none of these are quick plays, right? So, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm excited to talk about the banlist. 3 copies of Gnome material cannot be used for fusion synchro. I guess it's a level 1. Yeah, that's why. 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Springs. I mean, it's also a really good hand trap. It's like I just haven't seen it in a while, right? Because you have to control no cards, and it's a little circumstantial, and they can play around it a little bit if they're smart. But no material is really solid. It's not a horrible card. I think a lot of people forgot about it. It's what, $2? Yeah, this is kind of a. I'm looking at this deck. It's not okay. You got the Prosperities, right? Some more could be cheaper. Oh, I guess it's got 33 cents on TCG Player, so never mind. Zeus is right, but it's a relatively cheap deck. It's not super expensive. I mean, the most expensive cards, like I said, are going to be your Prosperities. You kind of do have to run this card though, unfortunately, because the deck does kind of get in its own way sometimes. But the 3 Dark really no more, fairly budget. Lightning Storm's once again a little more on the expensive side. Some more repulsion. This card will be sponsored. Turn all cards in your opponent's bone trapped in hand. Okay. You can discard this. You can banish this card, reveal a wing beast, reduce its level. Okay, that's really good actually. So, I mean, it's really good against heavy spell and trap type decks, which there are a lot of those. Sky Striker, Eldritch, Ultrageist, Salamangreat, what have you. That's why we're also running the Harpy's Feather Duster, and of course the Harpy's Feather Storm. Right, so that's another top 4 deck profile. So this is the deck that got second place that's coming up next. And this article is also written by Ren. Shout out to Ren. It's going to do this. It was piloted by Ryan Yu. Seems like a nice person, right? But we all know what Sky Striker's trying to do, right? At this point. We'll talk about that card in a second. For the main deck, let's jump right into it. Another 40 card main deck. As we see 3 copies of Sky Striker Ray, 2 copies of Sky Striker Rose, and then hand traps. So 2 Nibiru's, 3 Ash, 3 Ghost Ogre, 3 Veiler. So Ghost Ogre once again making an appearance in a main deck of a deck that got top 4. So just be on the lookout. It's a great card. 2 copies of Pot of Prosperity, 2 copies of Offerings to the Doomed. There's a couple of reasons to run this card. We'll talk about that in a second. 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army. 1 copy of Terraforming to search Area 0. 1 copy of Drones because it's at 1. 1 copy of Engage because it's at 1. And 1 copy of Multi-Roll because it's at 1. 1 copy of Afterburners. 1 copy of Shark Cannon. And then 3 copies of Widow Anchor because it is probably the best card that you can run at 3 for Sky Strikers. 1 copy of Area 0. 3 copies of Mystic Mine, and that's what I was talking about when I was talking about Offerings to the Doomed, right? So, for those who haven't read this card, you haven't played Duel Links, but anyway, it says target 1 face-up monster on the field, destroy that target, also skip your next draw phase. So there are a lot of circumstances. I actually saw one on the feature match. I don't know if the final got to pretty close. The final got pretty close to it. Mystic Mine was up a long time in the final match. Didn't end up winning with it though, but there are a lot of circumstances where you win via deck out because of Mystic Mind. And Offerings to the Doomed is going to put you in that situation, because here's what's going to happen, right? Let's say you're going first as a Sky Striker player. You do some Sky Striker things. Your opponent outs the board, creates a pretty scary board, can't kill you. You're going, you go on turn 3, you activate Mystic Mind, set. They don't have their Mystic Mind out. However, you, as a Sky Striker player, you prosperity, you engaged, you use terraforming, you've done a couple of different things. So now your opponent's deck has more cards, right? Offerings to the Doomed is going to allow you, skipping your next draw phase, it's going to allow you to potentially turn the tide in your favor if you're going for a deck out. Like, this is a very solid anti-deck out card, which synergizes with Mystic Mind, because that's where we're at now. 2 copies of Forbidden Droplet. Interesting, we're not seeing 3. Maybe there's a 3rd in the side deck. But usually when people run 2, I mean, you don't have to run, you can run as many as you'd like, but usually you see more than just 2. But anyway, 1 copy of Metaverse, 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, and that rounds out the main deck. Let's see, I haven't seen this do 20 spells and 16 monsters. It's a lot of spells. Sky Striker for you. I don't really have any too crazy comments about this list. I mean, we know kind of how Sky Striker functions. It's like activate Mystic Mind. You wait till your opponent's in a weird spot, and just kill him. It's very interactive. But for the extra deck, 1 copy of Access Code Talker, 1 copy of the Dark Charmer, 1 copy of the Light Charmer, 1 copy of Zeke, 2 copies of Hayate, 1 copy of the Earth one, that's its actual name, 3 copies of Kagari, 3 copies of Shizuku, 1 copy of Halka-Fibrax, because why not, and 1 copy of Celine, to round out. She's a warrior, right? Also a warrior, yeah. So the Celine Hulk is just Celine Hulk stuff, basically, because you can use Ash, Ghost Ogre, or Effective Alien to make Hulk and do all those cool, fun shenanigans. For the side deck, the 3rd copy of Nibiru, 2 copies of Rolling Lockbird, 3 Token Collector, 2 Cosmic Cyclone, 2 Twin Twisters, okay. Not running Harpies, Feather Duster. Not running Harpies anywhere. Okay, that's interesting. I'm trying to think of the situation where you'd rather have Twin Twisters over Harpies. I mean, I guess, because Cosmic Cyclone, because it banishes, there are circumstances we'd rather have Cosmic Cyclone. But Twin Twisters over Harpies, the big thing with Twin Twisters is you could potentially see, like, okay, I have an extra spell. Let me pitch that extra spell. Activate Twin Twisters, pop 2 back row. Now I have 2 spells in my graveyard. Maybe that's why there's no Harpies Feather Duster. It's just been kind of a staple of all side decks is they're running the 1 Harpies Feather Duster. But, like I said, this got 2nd place. I think they had 3 losses all tournament, including the final. So Ryan might know what he's doing. 2 copies if there can only be 1, because you can run it, so you might as well. And 3 copies of Dimensional Barrier for obvious reasons. But the winner of the 2022 Yu-Gi-Oh! North American Nationals, which means a lot because there will be no Worlds, is Tenny Sword Soul. This article is by Ren as he anticipated. And the pilot was Hansel Aguero. Like I've said, for every single one of these decks, you could probably find the actual creator's thoughts on it. So I really would recommend doing that. This is just my view on these decks, obviously, right? So this deck got 1st place. I think Hansel also had 2 losses going into the final, which, 11 rounds of Swiss, 7 rounds of the top 64. You can't lose the top 64, but 11 rounds of Swiss, it's gonna do that for you. But without further ado, let's get to the deck profile. 3 Ecclesia, 3 Moyi, 3 Longyang, 2 Taya. Their names are so similar, so I get them confused. 3 Ashina, 3 Vishuddha, 3 Adahara, and then 1 copy of the Water one. Let's be honest, this name is Tenny Spirit, the Water one. 1 copy of Called by the Grave, snuck in there with the monsters. 3 copies of Ash Blossom and Joy Springs. 2 copies of Pot of Desires, 3 copies of Emergence, 3 copies of the Heavenly Dragon Circle. You do see that card, by the way. Yes, 3 copies of Forbidden Droplets. 3 copies of a main decked Rivalry of the Warlords, which in all actuality won Hansel game number 1. Obviously the entire archetype is worms, except for the Ash Blossom and Joy Springs, which is a zombie, but no one cares about that. A lot of the extra deck monsters are worms. I think like Baron's the only one that's not. So Rivalry of the Warlords is almost always going to be live, and it is rarely going to be like even a deck like Marinus, Totally Awesome's in Aqua, right? In a deck like Floandereese, if they ever decide to go into their extra deck. Downward Magicians and Spellcasters, Zeus is a Machine. They don't usually go into the extra deck, but nonetheless. Sky Striker, which is what the matchup that Hansel had, obviously. Rival of the Warlords is amazing against Sky Striker. Because, one, they summon Ray. Ray's a little different, but they summon Rose. You activate Rivalry. They're like, oh crap. Not only can I not link this monster away, but I can't use my spells because there's a monster in my spell and trap or my main monster zone. Right, so Rivalry is super huge. Obviously, Mystic Mine. Okay. Okay, I'm already probably 40 minutes into this video, right? 30. And I don't want to waste too much time talking about something I'm going to talk about in another video. But, the Sky Striker deck, if we try to find it real quick. The Sky Striker deck, no, I got to go a different way. Should be completely different. Because the way the 2 decks function are 2 completely different styles. The way Sky Striker functions and the way Sword Soul functions are 2 completely different styles. Now, we look at Sky Striker. Ash Blossom and Joyous Springs is in the main, which is the same for Tenny Sword Soul. And I was talking about Ash Blossom when we were talking about the Floandereese deck, right? The only thing I might change is Droll for Ash, because Ash is such a versatile card, right? I don't think Ash is as obnoxious and suppressive as the other card that these 2 decks share, but I don't understand how 2 decks that function completely different, right? You have Sky Striker, which are trying to summon out 1 or 2 monsters a turn, or 3 or 4 monsters a turn, but not spam them out. They're trying to control you with cards like Widow Anchor and Afterburners. They're trying to play a little bit of a longer game. They're okay with running cards like Offerings to the Doomed. And they're really trying to just kind of not stall, but they're a control-based deck. And then you look at Tenny Sword Soul. Tenny Sword Soul does have control options, but it's really a combo-based deck, especially the Tenny version, where you're special summoning all these different monsters out. You could do Halka Firebrax things, all of that. How can both decks get away with running 3 copies of Mystic Mine? Because it's just that great of a card. Because is very, very similar to Vanity's Emptiness, which is a banned card, or to the way Skill Drain used to be, to where if you are aware that Mystic Mine might be activated soon, you can play around that. If your opponent's not, they can't play around it. And I understand, there's how many? There's Galaxy Cyclone, Twister, Mystical Space Typhoon, Twin Twisters, Cosmic Cyclone, Heavy Storm Duster, Harpy's Feather Storm. There's a lot of outs to Mystic Mine. I understand that. D-Spell outs Mystic Mine, right? But there aren't a whole lot. Interestingly enough, this deck does have archetype-specific cards that can out the Mystic Mine. But if you don't have an archetype-specific card that is a spell or a trap that can out the Mystic Mine, you're just out of luck. And Konami needs to do something. There's no reason why the same card, there's no reason why the same floodgate should face itself, right? And I'm not trying to take anything away from Hansel or Ryan Yu. Play whatever cards you have access to, right? But it's just, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. For the extra deck, 1 copy of Baron de Fleur, 2 copies of the Grand Master, 1 copy of the level 10 Sword Soul Monster, Oh, excuse me, this is a different level 10 Sword Soul monster. This is Sovereign Jingzong. Effect 12, banish the card. One copy of the other level 10 Sword Soul monster, which is pretty solid. 3 copies of Boxia. 1 copy of Chaofeng. 1 copy of Yazi. All of these are worms so far. This is also a worm. 1 copy of Draco Berserker of the Tenny. 3 copies of Monk of the Tenny, and 1 copy of Shaman of the Tenny. So these are all worm monsters except for Baron the Floor, which is such a solid card. So that's why you can play Rival of the World. It's pretty solid extra deck. Nothing wild there. 3 copies of Nibiru, 3 copies of Gamma, 1 copy of Driver, 3 copies of Lightning Storm, and then there's that 1 Harpy's Feather Duster, 1 copy of Red Reboot, because you never know, and 3 copies of, honestly, the card that probably won him the match, which is Anti-Spell Fragrance, which is going to be another TED Talk at another time, but let me know what you guys think. Like I said, make sure you guys check out these people themselves on YouTube, but this is just the top 4 deck lists from Nationals. Let me know what you guys think in those comments down below. Make sure you guys hit that like button to show the channel, subscribe for even more content. Most importantly of all, have a good day.